In the planning space, it's about saying we have our way of organizing, we have our way of relating to each other, and we need to hold up the examples of how planning has caused devastation. The Claiborne Expressway in New Orleans was designed by Robert Moses, like many of the highways, and it cut through the oldest black neighborhood in the country.
Same story. Well,
Treme.
Same story here, yeah.
You know, and folks are still feeling that pain. 300 different buildings and businesses, green space, infrastructure, and folks, that community still feels divided in different ways. And so what does it look like for us to say, this is the land that we have come to know as our own, but how do we start to recognize those histories that we don't talk about, like the original name of New Orleans, pre-French and Spanish and American existence, is Bobancha. It's called the place of many voices, right? The Choctaw folks. And so when we recognize that as the beginning of the conversation, at least from a land perspective, and we say there's room for all of us to be here. Now the question is, what are the terms we're going to be here together? And how do we start to kind of reclaim that power for ourselves on a case-by-case basis?
This is a time of transition in America. For those of us working in city building and community development, this is a moment to be daring, to dream big and speak the future we want into being. Our cities have talent and ideas. That's not the issue. The question is whether we will listen. We invited some great minds across cities to hear what they're thinking about their own work in this moment and how they're building what comes next. I'm so excited to be in conversation today with organizer, designer, and planner Dasjon Jordan from New Orleans. A little bit about Dasjon. He has worked with public agencies, cities, community-based organizations, and the private sector on place-based economic development strategies in the United States, South Africa, and Mexico. He specializes in commercial district revitalization, focusing on small business financial and marketing ecosystems, restorative design strategies, and neighborhood cultural planning. Before assuming his current role as executive director of Broad Community Connections in New Orleans, Dasjon served as the strategy and development officer for Ujamaa Economic Development Corporation. He holds a master's of city planning from MIT, y'all, where he was also a postgraduate fellow with the Community Innovators Lab, focusing on racial and economic justice in practice and pedagogy. Dasjon believes in people and trusting relationships to forge civic power and make things happen. I'm so excited to talk with him about his story, his work, his perspectives on Black labor, success, and imagination, and what we can learn from each other between Detroit and New Orleans. And our big question that we're holding this evening is, what is the future we want and how are we building it together? Dasjon, welcome to the Consulate.
Thank you so much, Orlando.
Man.
I'm embarrassed, man.
Are you?
I'm embarrassed. This is beautiful. You make me sound so amazing.
You are amazing, man. You wouldn't be here. You got flued out. You got put up in the Cochrane House.
I know,
we only do that for amazing people, man.
It feels like luxury. I feel like royalty.
I mean, I'm glad. We need to feel that way. We need to feel that way as Black folks. We need to know what it feels like to luxuriate and to feel like royalty, because we are. Especially in Detroit. I mean, you went to City Slicker today. What is?
Come on, let me take the shoe off.
What is more luxurious, more Black, more Detroit than a trip to City Slicker?
I feel like I got a badge of honor.
You got a badge of honor, and you and the owner are best friends now. So that's pretty dope. Listen, I want to ask you. We always start off these conversations trying to remain like on script, and then we go off script. And so I'm okay with where this conversation goes tonight. I know it'll be divinely led. But I want to ask you about how you got into the work of city building and why you feel called to this work.
How I got into city building, that's huge. That's a huge question.
I know.
I would say how I got called, it probably came way before I had the words of thinking about city building at all. I think about, like when you gave that question, I just kept thinking about my lineage and the folks I come from, the matriarchs, some of the patriarchs, some of the men, but really the spirit of my great grandmother, who had 11 kids,
Ooh,
7 girls. You know, her and my great-grandfather, they moved from a small town in Mississippi to New Orleans at 19, 19. One was 19, one was 20. They had 2 kids, and we're about to have another one, and decided to come to New Orleans for work. And though they didn't have money, they worked hard, and they knew how to make their money go a long way. And that spirit of multiplying the resource that they have to not only take care of themselves and their kids, but other neighborhood kids and their siblings that all moved there because they were there and for work. It's like, I don't know, it's the thing that I keep coming back to, like, what does community care look like? And for them to not have a lot of resources, and for the more well-off kids in the community to want to come and sit on the porch and be in the house, in the broken house with the scraps, you know, the seasoned scraps, as we would call it.
Yeah.
It must have meant magic for them, because I was fortunate enough to have a taste of that spirit and be in the presence of such a grand person. And to see that magic, how she could be in a room full of people and make everybody feel like it's just them and her. And to imbue love, like that for me is the beginning of the path to city building.
Wow. You know, I always say this, that grandmamas, Black grandmas, were doing placemaking before it became a fundable thing or even a term, right?
There you go.
This house that you're talking about, that people just felt like family when they came to, I think almost every Black person with a mission points to grandma as like this staple, as this example, man. I mean, it's rich. It's rich. And this is in New Orleans.
Yeah, this is in New Orleans, and a side of town not so thought of as, like, you know, when you think of New Orleans, you think jazz, you think culture a certain kind of way. But this side of town was like a promised place of the burgeoning middle class. It was sold...
a Black middle class?
First, it was pitched to white folks.
Okay.
But then they realized they couldn't get white folks to go there. So then it was pitched to Black folks who couldn't afford to buy property in the central part of the city.
Wow.
And so my folks came with a ton of other folks who came to this side of town called New Orleans East, and then also the Lower Ninth Ward, which many people may know by virtue of the news and Hurricane Katrina. Like, those were places where tons of folks from the city and from Mississippi and other parts of the South would come to build their own house from the ground up, or, you know.
Did great-granny and granddad build their house?
I think it was one of my grandmother's brothers and my great-grandfather who built it because there was a house that they bought, and then it burned down, and then they had to rebuild it.
Yeah. You said something that sticks out to me, and I want to ask you about it. You said that when most people think of New Orleans, they think of jazz and they think of music. Yep. If you had it your way, when people think of New Orleans, what would you want them to think about?
I would go to care. There's a lot of care. Like, you know, the consistent theme that I've known New Orleans to be is a place that care, that has deep care for its people, and has deep pride for the place that it's, you know, the geography that it's in. But even when we don't have the resources to have the shiny house, shiny car, or just be able to live in the way that we think that should be normal, folks find a way to care despite storms, despite disaster. And even more recently, you know, we had Hurricane Ida come through, and power was out mostly in the city for about 10 days. And that didn't really make national news in the way that it should have, but there was a spirit of care that kind of showed up across the city, where folks were mobilizing in their small battalions to make sure folks had ice. Our elders were taken care of and had food, had hot food. Make sure there were caravans of gas. And, like, it's not the easy thing to sell, to have tourists come to the city, but that spirit of love is what people come for.
Stable. Care, love, Black care, Black love. I love it. Let's talk about disaster and how your story sort of interweaves with disaster. And I want to talk about 2005 and Hurricane Katrina. I think you were, what, 12 years old?
I was 12.
12 years old at the time, and Katrina hit. What happened?
Wow. So 16 years ago, when the day before Katrina I think the day that is in so many of our minds, is that thought of we'll come back, or the storm isn't that bad. So I remember packing, I don't know, 3 days worth of clothes and seeing the news channel and just seeing this circular kind of spiral on the screen, not really knowing that was a weather Doppler and showing the storm coming. That said, we left maybe 5, 6 in the morning and went to Baton Rouge, which normally takes an hour, hour and a half, and it took us maybe 7 hours in contraflow, right? So it was a journey for me in that moment, but I think it didn't hit me the way it hit my parents. I think over time I realized my sense of connectedness with community and living in the same neighborhood that my grandparents were raised in, even though not, again, the Black burgeoning middle class. I went to the same elementary school that my mom went to, that my grandmother went to, right? Like, I know not only my first cousins, but my first cousins once removed, twice removed.
And I don't even know what that means. So that's, I always hear Black folks talk about a second cousin twice removed. What does that mean?
But to know each other in school and to know the lineages that we come from, even if it's only 2 generations. And to say, I know that is my blood cousin, not, that's my play cousin. All that was kind of removed when Katrina hit. And we ended up going to Baton Rouge for a couple of months, living for about a month, lived in a hotel. And in that space, that liminal space, you start to figure out, okay, I'm not going back, or I'm not going back anytime soon. And to watch this disparate community of folks who had all lived in New Orleans, who ended up in this hotel, kind of take care of each other temporarily, was one little seed of hope towards that. But then we ended up moving into a smaller suburban town that was a power plant town, and actually the site of the largest slave rebellion in the country. I didn't know that until, becoming much older, but it explains the geography and the history and the sense of place. But I realized I didn't have my family. I didn't have my extended community. I didn't have that sense of spirit, that ability to walk. Yeah. From one aunt's house to my great aunt's house to this distant cousin's house, and to know that if I did something bad, they would see me. They would see me. It would go from school. It would reach everybody before I got home.
Wow. So the loss of that connection, the loss of the thing that you feel called to, is to continue in Great Granny's legacy of care and communal love. That disaster sort of diluted that a little bit. So you didn't go back to New Orleans. So does that mean that your homes, the homes of your family, were destroyed?
Yes, I would say my home then with my parents, it got maybe 7 feet of water initially, and the water line kind of settled at 3 feet for a bit. And so imagine a lot of folks weren't able to go back for a few weeks. Yeah. Right. And so in a case where flooding normally happens, you can get in there, got a house, maybe salvage a lot of stuff. But when you have extended periods of time where water is sitting and there's a lot of moisture, and we're talking about the summer, the deep part of the summer, kind of marinating, you start to lose those relics. Yeah. Those photos, those pieces. And so at that point, it was more of a salvage what we can salvage and create a new memory with those things, or let them kind of symbolize some part of a fragmented past.
Yeah. A lot of Black folks in this work, right? A lot of Black folks with a mission sort of point to, the love of a matriarch or patriarch that helped to mold them and their sense of community, but oftentimes also point to trauma that turns into the wood that they use to keep a flame ablaze. Yeah. Right? How is that love, that communal love, how is that disaster and that trauma showing up in your work today?
It's funny when you gave that, that the mention of love and trauma, they feel like they're 2 different points of fuel. That trauma only goes so far. And when I think about Katrina, or even more recently with Hurricane Ida, 16 years to the day.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that. Okay.
16 years to the day.
Wow.
It is a short fuel that is constantly in that spirit of, I'm resisting this thing that is being thrust upon me, and I'm trying to salvage and control this thing that I want to manifest. And love is more about I'm present. There are folks, there's myself, there's my community that I need to be in deep intimacy with and care and relationship to say that deadline, whatever that thing is I need to get done is not as important. I can lend a little bit more time to support folks getting from point A to point B. And it forces you to be in your body in a way that trauma wants you to feel the experience and you become disembodied in so many ways, but love is like the grounding resource that's like, I'm here, I'm present in my body with the limitations and all, and I'm still magnificent and I still have something to give. And it's not about ego, you know?
Talk about, we're going to get to your work for sure, all right? But I'm always interested in learning more about the person first, right? Because it gives us sort of, you know, an amazing backdrop to the work. You went to MIT, so you're Black Ivy, right? But there is a story there that I think is significant, right? And it could be persistence, but you'll tell us what it is. You applied to MIT after undergrad, and you didn't get in, right? And then you worked for a year, and then applied again and got in. So take me to that time where you found out that you didn't get in MIT, and what that year looked like for you. To the point where you felt like, I'm going to go at this again. I'm going to apply again. And then you got in. Because, man, I would have been like, bump MIT. They missed it. You know what I'm saying?
It was March 6, 2016.
He remembers that day.
I do. It hit me in a way because my energy wasn't so emphasized in going to MIT, but I wanted to go to Harvard, to the planning program there. And I'd gone to this amazing conference where I met some amazing people, some folks here, at this conference where there was so much of this Black imagination and joy and creativity and exploration that I was like, oh, this is the space I need to be in. And to see that work had been led by grad students, not faculty, but grad students had compelled such a powerful space. A few months before, I was like, oh, well, this is where I need to go. And my journey to that place got me to see a New Orleanian on a panel who had gone to both schools. And she made the mistake of being on this panel and saying, oh yeah, I'm from New Orleans, X, Y, and Z. And so as soon as she got off the stage, I said, well, where'd you go to school? Who are your people? Where are you from? Where are you from, as our community would say. And we ended up in this very rich dialogue about community and how she ended up doing the work that she was doing in landscape, architecture, and planning, and had been pushing me to consider MIT. And I was like, I don't want nothing to do with that. I'm good. That's so technical, that's so scientific. I have nothing to do with STEM. I'm all right. These are where my folks are. And I still decided to apply. All my energy went towards Harvard. And I was like, I guess I also just, change up a couple of things and apply to MIT. And I submitted those things, and it just fell on deaf ears. I was so excited and amped up, and I thought, it's going to be in Cambridge, and it's going to be around all this Black joy, and it just unfolded. And in the place I was in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, I was trying to leverage my experience in architecture in undergrad to be useful in community, but everyone was saying, hey, you're not this tool, you're not qualified to do this work. Your skills aren't transferable to us. So they couldn't see it, but I could. And that same person ended up tagging me in a job description on Facebook, of all things, after I didn't get in. And ended up connecting with an alum from the program. And it was through that experience of being in community with that person and seeing, okay, you're not wearing these letters as a badge of honor. You're doing the work. And when you need to use a tool, you use a tool. But this is first about community. I was encouraged then to say, well, let me take a second look at this program and what it's about. And then I applied again. And to both schools and another school, and got in all three. And I was like, okay,
they got the message.
Return, okay.
Return.
And, you know, I decided to be very intentional about, you know, why I was going to grad school.
Yeah.
Who I was going for, you know.
Yeah. Give us a sense of, you know, like in your community in New Orleans, who lives and works there? What are some of the key issues people are talking about? And what is top of mind for the people you serve, both near term and long term? What's coming up for the folks in New Orleans? I heard you talk a little bit about Ida and all of that. What's coming up?
Yeah, I would say, well, first I'll say culture. Culture is always a topic of conversation. It's conversation when it's not conversation.
What does that mean?
Culture is I think it's a euphemism for Black cultural expression.
Okay.
It's like, you know, there's someone in New Orleans who has a shirt that says everything you love about New Orleans is because of Black people.
Yeah.
Right?
The culture.
The food, the air, the way we occupy space on the corner, that improvisation.
The way we laugh.
You know?
Yeah.
That creativity, like all of that is what draws people into New Orleans. And so folks are always feeling this, well, since Katrina have been feeling this eradication of culture, this commercialization of culture, where folks are like down to their last dime and have to use their talents to go engage in white society a certain kind of way and aren't able to even sustain the households that they live in. They can't pay their rent because wages have been stagnated almost 15, 20 years. And, you know, a house that would have gone for $60,000 in 2005 is now going for nearly $500,000 in 2016 in some neighborhoods, but on average maybe about 400,000. So what do you do? Where's your sense of self-determination, and how do you use your culture? How do you protect your culture without, you know, kind of pimping out your culture to folks because they have some money?
It's a tension that we carry doing the work in these cities, right? There was a resident on the east side here in the city of Detroit who came to me, and she said Orlando, and she was living in an area that had a lot of pressure to develop, right? It's an attractive area, and you know, white folks were walking dogs in the area, and the appearance of white folks drives the market up, right? And so it was coming, it was happening, and the best way she could describe it to me was, Orlando, I feel like my neighborhood is losing a soul. I didn't know what she meant. I'm like, what do you mean? Like the music? Like what's going on? What's going on here, right? And I had like this eye-opening moment when I was in Germany, talking to a professor who was German, but he taught American history and politics. And I can't put my finger on exactly what he said to me, but it clicked of what this resident was talking about. She was talking about a type of cultural anxiety, right, that she has as cities do what they do, and that is what? Change, right? How are y'all dealing with that cultural anxiety?
Oh, that's a hard one. That's so hard. I mean, I think we are feeling it now more than ever, given COVID has kind of kept us contained. You know, a lot of folks depend on tourism and their ability to be storytellers in their own industries, whether it's hospitality, whether it's music or art, performance. And when you shut a city down that is grossing $7.1 billion off tourism.
7.1 billion, wow, that's the industry.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and yet now, they were fighting for scraps before, but now they're a bit tighter. Folks are feeling a bit of a chokehold, for lack of better words. And then you add Hurricane Ida, and that feeling of, you know, there's no national attention because we didn't flood. So now we're all we got. So we have to figure out what it means to hold folks accountable while also feeling disillusioned and feeling overplanned, undercared about, or, you know, somebody put it, you know, the city that care forgot. And folks feel that in a way, whether it's, you know, thinking about government, thinking about the private sector, folks feel the tools that they have are being stripped from under them, and they have no sense of, they have no sense of agency to kind of actualize and to manifest in a way that's about them, but really about their families and about their blocks and neighborhoods, because we're a strong city of neighborhoods and personalities. And when you start to watch the neighborhoods change names this late in the game.
Oh, let's not talk. I hear the Detroiters. That's why I think it's so dope when Black people from around the country talk to each other, because sometimes we are going through and having. I was talking with Rodrika earlier. We're having the same experiences around the country, and we don't even know it because we don't talk enough. Everybody back here was like, "Yep." It was when all of a sudden all the neighborhoods in Detroit got names, and we didn't grow up like that in the city, right? Like all of the neighborhoods got named. We used to name the neighborhoods after the street. Oh yeah, you live 7 Mile, like 7 Mile Grassy area. You know what I mean? Like 7 Mile, but now it's what G7, right? So when the names and the labels come. Black folk be like, okay.
We know it's changing.
Yeah.
And also you get things like folks moving to neighborhoods where music is played by little kids as early as 5 and 6 years old. They're blasting trombone or trumpet and learning how to play because this is what we've always done in this neighborhood. And folks move in because they love the culture, but then they don't love the people of the culture. And they say, it's too loud, the decibel level.
They criminalize the culture.
So you need to measure the decibel level.
How?
On your own, so that you know not to play beyond this time.
We had the same issue here. Somebody call it noise pollution. I've never heard that term before, right? But like you're attracted to the culture, you move here, and as soon as it is inconvenient, you criminalize it. Like you call them the cops. Let's talk about cultural preservation some more, because I'm loving this, and I think we can unpack it some more. One of the things that I'm constantly saying that to the answer of the question, what is urgent? I say the griot, right? How are you, the question is framed this way. How are you in the complicated history of New Orleans with climate change, a vulnerable future, how do you think the stewardship of the work, connecting, telling the story of the past, present, and future, what does that look like?
So I think for us, it's about distilling what culture is, how are we defining culture. And we have a term in New Orleans we use called culture bearers, people who carry the culture on their backs. And at first glance, I think a lot of folks associate that with folks who may dress as Black masking Indians within their cultural tribe within the tradition of carnival. In New Orleans, because Black people call it carnival in New Orleans. We don't call it Mardi Gras, right? So that's a political decision to associate, right? I bring it up because we see what those folks have to go through, the musicians, those types of culture bearers, and we say, well, they're now white folks infiltrating and buying those suits and putting them in museums. There are white folks now dressing up in this tradition that is gone for decades. There are white folks now who hire second line bands, all black second line bands to parade off around their school campuses, things that we've never done. And so there's the monetary piece of that with those types of culture barriers. But I think for us, the imagination has to come in thinking about culture a bit more broad. And we overlook business owners. We overlook.
And that's the crux of your work.
Right? It's at the center of my work, looking at the mundane. I think August Wilson kind of talks about that. Writing the mundane. Yeah, looking at the beauty of Black culture in the mundane, because that's where culture is, in the everyday. And so if we start there, who are the people who are committed every day as folks who are carrying the culture? And it's, to me, a significant portion are these Black business owners. Because in New Orleans, that's the front door of the city. This is the first impression you get. You meet a business owner, that relationship of care and impression will shape your entire experience while you're there in such a small city.
All right, talk about broad community and the work. Okay, so now we're on the work.
Yeah.
What are y'all doing?
Doing too much, in the Black tradition of labor, right? We do too much and not enough still.
Yeah, what?
But, you know, our work really right now has been to go back to ground zero. We've had a couple different leadership changes, and I've come back to the organization about 4 months ago, 5 months ago, and really have come in to say, like, how do we reground and set our agenda moving forward, but how do we set that in the spirit of care and also an assets-based frame of doing work?
Say that.
You
Say
know?
that.
You know, we
Start from the abundant.
Yeah, we start so much from there's a disparity. We have been oppressed and marginalized, and that's fine to recognize that. But at a certain point, it becomes the totality of the narrative. And so what's what's encoded and all that is that
You just be saying stuff like it's just like it's not heavy. And that we need to let it breathe a little bit. Because what becomes a part and what infiltrates the narrative becomes the reality of so many people within the culture and outside of the culture.
Yeah, you carry that. When you write that narrative for that grant, we have been hurt, beat up, bruised, abandoned, stepped on. There's a certain way that we write that story that says the power is in the resource that we are given, not in our ability to do the work, and that is the assist.
We're the offering. We're the offering basket. I said this last time. I mean, like, we gonna place the offering basket right there. What does support of the Black business infrastructure, the crux of the work at Broad Communities, look like in practice?
So at Broad Community Connections, for us, it's first listening and not assuming. So often we get into these, let's support the business by either making a quick judgment about what they need based upon the way we show up in their storefront or in their office space without actually sitting and listening and hearing what they say they need. Because sometimes the barrier is the thing that they say, and we need to trust that, right? But at the core of that is the relationship. If we have no relationship, no tool that I offer, great or not, will be of interest of you because you don't trust me.
That's right.
And I have to hold that trust as something sacred that I will not
and that exists
jeopardize.
Outside of a grant term.
Yeah.
Like, relationships and trust aren't built within the 6-month or 12-month grant term like that. You can't sacrifice the fidelity in doing that.
It takes time.
Yes.
And, I remember when I first came onto the organization 5 years ago, and the executive director then was like, hey, I need you to go door to door to get folks to sign on to this permit so that we can do this event on the street. I said,
so I'm about to go meet people.
I was like, I don't know if that's the way to go.
Okay.
And I was like, nah, that's not gonna work. He was like, no, I'm sure. He's like, it's gonna work. And I was like, nah, bro, that's not gonna work. And so I went door to door, and then he came, and he felt the rejection of folks saying, nah, I'm good, I'm okay, because there was a not an ivory tower experience, but a separation that, like, you are not watching them day to day to understand the amount of things that they are having to face. Administratively, personally, the amount of people who come to them and think, you have money, so give me some of your money. The amount of times city folks are coming around, checking permits or, inspecting, or, there's so many invisible politics that play out on a small business that one thing could be the thing that makes them break. And so without respect for their humanity and what they're trying to accomplish, it further compromises the work that we could do collectively. And so for me now in that work, the trust that I was able to build 5 years ago, and from that point to this point, now we can have a base conversation that says, here's a grant, we've already written our narratives, we already know how we want to empower ourselves. Is this an opportunity that fits where we want to go? Not are we chasing every grant dollar, every governmental resource, for our benefit, because at a certain point you become exhausted and you become lost in their narratives and sense of outcomes that they want from you.
And the language. Yeah, man, yeah. So trust began with just listening, like really listening.
Going door to door. I think the strongest relationship I had was with bookstore owner, the oldest black bookstore in New Orleans. It's called Community Book Center. So give them a shout out. But I remember going to so many of the other business owners on the block, and they said, have you talked to her? Have you talked to Miss Vera? Have you talked to her? And I was like, no, I hadn't, but I'm making my way down there. And so I go in there, and she says, you know, we do our introductions, and she says, okay, give me 1 second. 1 second turns into 5 minutes. 5 minutes turns into an hour. An hour turns into 5 hours. And I sat there the entire time.
That's right.
I was kind of pressed. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna say I wasn't pressed after the first hour.
You ain't gonna interrupt Miss Vera.
Right, right. But there was so much to uncover in sitting in that space, and so much love built in that process of saying, my agenda is not a priority over your care and existence. You know, as level setting, I come with the positionality of power in people's minds, but really the power is in her choice to engage me or not.
Can we talk about that? You said it, so I got to talk about it. Let's talk about that power dynamic. I mean, even your credentials as a planner, right? Mm-hmm. Even you being in an executive's chair over a nonprofit that is resourced, right? Yeah. How do you carry the tension of the culpability of an industry that has done significant harm to our communities, the culpability of the planning industry rooted in colonialism, right? The movement and the planning of land and and people, right? How do you carry that?
For me, the tension lies in understanding Blackness is not centered. Black existence and development is not centered in colonial planning. Mm-hmm. Black folks have been mobile. We moved across land.
Nomadic.
Right? And we think about being nomadic as such a horrible term. And so when I think about terms like being displaced, we have to challenge that notion about our sense of ownership and entitlement over geography and understand that ancestrally, we have moved between places and chosen to be in different places. Now, being pushed out is a layer of complication that says we don't have any authority over the choice to move or not our decision to want to be like white folks and be permanent in a place beyond, our time. Yeah. And so for me in the planning space, it's about saying we have our way of organizing, we have our way of relating to each other, and we need to hold up the examples of how planning has caused devastation. The Claiborne Expressway in New Orleans was designed by Robert Moses, like many of the highways, and they cut through the oldest black neighborhood in the country.
Same story.
Treme.
Same story here, yeah.
And folks are still feeling that pain. 300 different buildings and businesses, green space, infrastructure, and folks, that community still feels divided in different ways. And so what does it look like for us to say, this is the land that we have come to know as our own, but how do we start to recognize those histories that we don't talk about, like the original name of New Orleans, pre-French and Spanish and American existence, is Bobancha. It's called the place of many voices, right? Mm-hmm. The Choctaw folks. And so when we recognize that as the beginning of the conversation, at least from a land perspective, then we say there's room for all of us to be here. Now the question is, what are the terms we're going to be here together? Mm-hmm. And how do we start to kind of reclaim that power for ourselves on a case-by-case basis?
Mm. Wow. Let's talk about success and how Black New Orleans define success. And you've done that work, and we want you to talk about it. And so what does Black success look like to the people you interview? How are you defining success in the Black community development space there? And at what cost? And is success measured by its proximity to power, its proximity to whiteness? You talk about the fatigue of the resilient trope, right? What does success look like for you? And I love this question. Yeah. And the people you talk to.
You know, it's funny. So my dissertation was on this, and it was really about making some space to say, are Black folks defining their own version of entrepreneurial success? Or are we defaulting to saying economic growth and expansion and capitalism and corporatization is the goal? And jobs, everybody promises jobs as the...
You can't run for mayor without promising jobs.
And there's a there's a reality to that has not been our reality over time, right? Our sense of entrepreneurship doesn't generally, within the American context, doesn't come because, we want it to be entrepreneurial. It's because folks wouldn't sell to us. They wouldn't allow us to exist within this paradigm because they don't see us as people. So surely they don't see us as people to buy from, right? And for me, that work was really about saying, I can put categories on those definitions of success based upon my experience and my research and my work. But the best research is firsthand research. And it was really putting the mic in each one of those business owners' hands to say, how do you define it? And what I was able to find is that beyond economic growth or wanting to be sustainable, well, actually that it was maybe the second or third thing in their list. It was really about creating space for other entrepreneurs, creating some spaces where folks could see themselves in a multiplicity of ways. They could see Blackness in every kind of way, engage with itself, and feel protected and safe in a semi-public way. So they don't have to feel trapped at home. To see folks feel liberated within their own bodies, right? To see that folks, Black folks and non-Black folks, can understand that Black folks can tell their own stories about their own history, and that other folks should be informed about Black histories as well, because it is a part of the larger canon of American history and global history. And so just hearing these things, these words from these business owners, some who have been in business for almost 40 years, and some who had just decided to be in business within a couple of years of the time of that work, for them to have that expression and no relationship to each other in that way, was like, we're in it for something bigger than money. We're not just chasing money because we know how to make money. We've had to make money to survive. Thriving for us looks like supporting each other. And it's always been there, resistance or not resistance,
Talk about this, I guess I would call it this marginal idea of decentering whiteness when we want to talk about success. We want to talk about radical imagination and dreaming, right? You once said, can we dream about having something? Can we dream about not having what white people have, right? Or what they hold dear, outside of the context that America has set, which is white is superior, colonialism, imperial, all of those things, right? Taking away that context, taking away that veil. What does imagination look like for you? What does dreaming look like for you?
I think dreaming for me is about, again, going back to ground zero, like we have the richness in the soil and the mundane. If I go to a barbershop and I think about it only as a barbershop, I'm missing the entire richness. A barbershop doesn't exist it doesn't exist to resist or to necessarily tell a story or to create exponential wealth. It exists because there's a basic service that folks go for, and it makes them feel good, and it's present. And
you can't tell nobody nothing when they fresh out the chair.
Fresh cut, fresh do. It changes your experience of, I got a haircut before I came. I went in there feeling one way. I left out feeling, feeling like Curtis Mayfield, with the slow walk, and I say we need to go there because there's richness below the surface of just feeling good. When we look at our black barbershops and beauty shops, those are the only spaces of mental reprieve that our communities can afford, right? It gets them right for work or whatever.
Gets them ready.
But also, it's the place where they can feel vulnerable, even if temporarily.
Free flowing conversation.
Right.
Or you ever see a black man fall asleep in the chair?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
You know, that comfort.
Reprieve. Yes,
So,
comfort.
so what does it look like to build an imagination from that baseline, that is the space? The Black Bookstore is a space of knowledge, and not just in the book, but in the exchange between elders and youth and academics and community folks and organizers. Like, it's there, and they're not existing in that shared space just for the sake of resistance. They have their own ideas and imaginations, and they till this soil that allows for accidents and serendipity to kind of happen, and folks to feel some joy in the midst of all the chaos, you know? Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's about saying, how do we better support these institutions? Because there are many institutions that our folks go to feel safe, right? No different than, the Negro Motorist Green Book.
Yeah.
You have a formal tool to get you from place to place. Folks now don't need that book. They know where to go. They know those places that make them feel safe and affirmed and those places that don't. They can feel when somebody's giving them an eye from behind their head or watching them a little bit too closely. You know, so these things are somatic, like they're in our body, or they're epigenetic, they're in our DNA.
Come on, vocabulary.
You know? You know, but there are these experiences that I think we have made so intellectual and like disconnected from who we are in the everyday. And I keep going back to August Wilson because he does it in such a beautiful way that says, like, we exist now, and if that is all there is, that is so beautiful. Or Toni Morrison, you know, with blackness is the central character of my stories, and it's global.
It is.
And let's just start.
Let's start there.
There.
You're talking about like the spirit of a culture that's intangible, but that shows up on the pavements of our neighborhoods in a tangible way, like the barbershop, right? And other, like the bookstore. Mm-hmm. So we have, spurts of circular economy and cooperative economy within our communities, right? And we've always had it. Oftentimes, though, and not to center whiteness again, that culture, that circular economy, that community of love and care is disrupted by rage, is disrupted by massacre, is disrupted by a freeway and demolition. So as we amplify these communities of love and care, how do we protect it?
That's a hard one. It's a really challenging one because my experience wants me to go, I don't want to engage with whiteness. I don't want to be in the business of resistance. I don't want to be in the business of teaching and retooling people who have chosen to be white. And I say that with intention.
No, I get
people,
it.
You know, people who have chosen to identify with whiteness and white culture, which is predatory and extractive and in many ways soulless. And folks have chosen to give up the heritage that they come from, the lineages that they came from, to be a part of whiteness. I'm like, that's your work, but I can't.
So it can have a black face.
Right? Yeah. Right. But it's not just their work, because we still have our folks modeling themselves after those identities, wanting to have that sense of agency and power. There are folks who aspire, in my community, who aspire to black capitalism. I was like, do you really understand what that means? Are you okay with black folks being on the bottom and being abused by other black folks at the top? Because white folks have chosen to do that to their own folks and to us. Imagine how horrible that must feel if they ever had to sit still long enough to engage with that decision that they're making. What kind of mourning and grief will they have to deal with if they had to sit in all of those choices, not that they just made, but their ancestors? And guess what? it's in their DNA too. They can feel it in their body memory too. And they don't even have words for it. Many of them don't. So I choose to not engage with folks who are willfully ignorant, but I allow myself to be open because my faith challenges me to say, be open, because you never know what seeds you're planting to change an entire reality.
It sounds like, too, though, that you're describing a trauma to the psyche on both sides. Mm-hmm. So where is healing in your work? Where does that fit in?
Healing in my work really is about resisting, first, the notion of time. Because the biggest culprit of capitalism and of this world that we're in right now is like vying for our time. And once that we've given up our time, all the other stuff is easy to get. So if we stay busy, then we never have time to actually sit and reflect, to be present in our body. Like, so in my work, the hope is to give business owners a bit more time, to give residents a bit more time, you know, to sit and to reflect and to be cared for. So that way they feel encouraged that they do have influence and actual agency over their own blocks, their businesses, their neighborhoods. But because their time seems like the most precious thing taken from them, if I can help to give them a minute back, 5 minutes back, where they don't have to deal with that reality, and then give them a tool, then I've done something, you know?
Mm-hmm. Time. Okay. Whew. I want to ask you, because we're coming up at time. When you close your eyes, what are your dreams for the future of your city, New Orleans? When you close your eyes, what do you see for the future?
Now I got to close my eyes. I got to close my eyes. So when I close my eyes, the future that I see for the city, first is investing in youth and our elders. That says our elders' knowledge is valuable, no matter how many people discount the information or call it anecdotal or folklore. The histories matter, their experiences matter. Let's archive that. Let's figure out a way to make sure those memories are being passed to the generation of the future. But also, how do we give context for our young folks to feel empowered to say, you are the people who will solve these issues around climate change and economic development or culture. And those issues at an intersection. What does it look like when the next storm hits and we need to switch our workforce and the culture bearers need jobs, but they need to be the protectors of their own neighborhoods? How do you give them the tools and skills and resources so that they have a multiplicity of skills and they don't have to depend on their culture as their economic, tool alone? Putting youth at the front of that, supporting these, seeing these business owners as culture bearers and allowing them to,
I love
I love that word. It's big because it's the place where folks feel they know our lineage is protected here. Our body is protected here. Our community is protected here. There will be no harm that comes from the outside that shows up in this space. This belongs to me and to us, right? So for me, it's about building those places up and seeing them radically different to say, now they're the places where the young folks go to get the tools and knowledge to change their neighborhood, the city. Yeah. I try not to cast that 50-year vision. There was a...
like we could start now.
There's an organizer, a guy named Kenneth Bailey. He said,
That's my grandfather's name.
Look at that. See?
That's my grandfather's name.
Look at that.
Yeah.
But, he said, we talk about the future as if it's this 40-year, 50-year kind of projection. Sometimes the only future that people have is tomorrow. What is our responsibility to get them to live boldly today, that 50-year in the future vision? How do we make space for them to imagine right now?
It's Bailey's consciousness, that consciousness that he's talking about, resonating in the actors that are doing this work in the city. Is your staff holding that consciousness? Are other community development organizations and economic development support orgs, the government, like holding that consciousness? Like
I think we're all in this shift. We're in this major shift. We're seeing cultural organizations now get into the environmental justice workforce work. We're watching small business and economic development organizations get into public health and mental wellness work. And so to see these collisions happen because one, our city is sinking, right? And climate change ain't going nowhere no time soon, unfortunately. Culture is still on the front lines. And that wealth disparity is still there. So we have to look at these things at intersections, and now there are unique partnerships that are starting to happen, but need to happen more aggressively.
So the question that we're holding tonight is, what is the future we want, and how are we building it together? When we zoom out to put Black neighborhoods, Black cities across the world in that, right? What comes first to mind for you?
History. We have to, the grills, right?
Like, yeah, it's urgent for me.
I think we look at it as a book that sits on the shelf in the library that we don't, visit. But without that, we're constantly thinking that creation comes from a blank canvas. And that is also a Eurocentric concept, that a blank canvas is the starting point for creation. We have always been folks of cyclical creation. We've always built on the past and projected to the future. There's nothing new under the sun. So if we have more of those stories elevated and accessible in formats that may not always be that kitchen table conversation that a grandparent can have with their kid and their grandkid, but exists in some type of public shared archive, or exists when somebody steps their foot on the sidewalk and they can see that projected, or they can feel that tactile memory. We have to become a bit more creative about how we imbue those stories in our spaces and in our systems to say.
And in practicum.
Right,
yeah.
Right? Because when we overly make abstract policy. What would happen if policy said, before you do anything, you have to go to every neighbor. Before you do any development, you have to go to every neighbor and archive their story up to this point before any type of zoning change happens on the block. And then the responsibility is on the person who develops it, as well as the city who allows the development, to imbue that history on that site in perpetuity in some fashion that isn't a tombstone or a historical marker, but has to show up. So they have to do the due diligence of engaging beyond
a meeting.
Yeah, like an email blast or that generic ass email that goes out that says development is happening in your neighborhood, even though you should have known this a year ago when the permits were first pulled. Right?
Yeah, so we gotta get past and I don't even know how, but we got to get past political expediency, because it's like you talked about the promise of jobs. Like I said, you can't run for mayor if you don't promise jobs, right?
But this is the thing that we were talking about a bit earlier about what are we willing to sacrifice, because though government and the private sector have that expediency, so do our people have that sense of urgency. So how do we make sure that our folks know that though we don't live our lives fully in resistance, we have to be better at going through a process of struggle, because struggle will not be the absence of, white supremacy or patriarchy or capitalism. Struggle is going to be there as long as there are people. How do we struggle in a way that is smart, with better tools, that is, has love in it, and also says, this decision may not make everybody feel good now, but we can go back and change along the way. There's room because we have a strong relationship.
Because of that relationship,
because we built that relationship.
Be fluid.
Right.
It allows us to be dynamic.
Yeah.
That's a tall order, sir.
That's why I'm not doing it alone.
and it's a challenge. So in this tall order that you have, and in this challenging time, what gives you hope? What keeps you going?
History, my lineage, love, laughter, the fact that I can still, feel in my body when pain happens or when excitement happens. The fact that there are all these beautiful Black people in this room, because we could be so defeated. We have the right to be defeated. We have the right to be stressed and exhausted and tired. And yet, in the face of all that, folks have chosen to be here, to be in love, to hear the soothing warmth of your voice and leadership.
Whatever, your voice. You got this Billy D thing happening.
And for us to be in this communal conversation that, is reflective of so much of the work that is happening across this room. Like, it's not my story. Like, this is our story, one of our stories.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You being here, sir, is so monumental to me, and it is representative of a mission that I dreamt up a long time ago, to be in brave space and to be in conversations with Black folks in my city, but Black folks from everywhere, right? Because there's so much that we can learn from each other. There's so much encouragement that happens in conversation, and I believe that conversations like this also are the impetuses for change, are the impetuses for daring to imagine, daring to be revolutionary enough to dream, right? Yeah. Because we ain't asked about what we dream about like that. We're not often asked. Yeah. And so to continue to have these conversations and push that narrative out and give Black folks especially time to reflect and to dream and to imagine is revolutionary. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. A big thank you to our guest, Dasjon Jordan, and to the Cochrane House for hosting us. Join us next time on Urban Consulate Confidential.